Awesome. Okay, well, I'll tell you, I have been given a few nicknames over the years, some of which I can share with you and some of which I can't. But would you like me to share with you some of the ones that I've gotten over the years? Is that okay? I just thought that'd be fun to kind of kick us off. Okay, I was thinking about this earlier this week. There were four that came to my mind, and they each kind of come from a different period of life. The first one came from my freshman year, ninth grade history teacher, who gave everyone in class a nickname at some point in the year, and you didn't know when it was gonna come. You just knew you were gonna walk in one day, and you were chosen that day, and your nickname had arrived. Wouldn't that be? We should just do that at the Co. I don't know. But one day about halfway through the year, he just looked at me, and he called on me, and he said, "Do or die, Ryan Stye." And I kind of like that, like it didn't really fit me at all, but it made me feel good. And so throughout all of high school, occasionally I'd be at my locker, I'd be whatever in the hallway, and someone would come by and go, "Do or die," and that was it. So that was fun. The second one came in high school as well, around the same time. This one was Tooth. Okay, this one came to me from I was on the drum line, so this came from me from some of the guys that were on drum line with me. And it came because, before braces in life, I had a tooth, like an eye tooth that was up here, if that makes sense. And I could close my mouth around that tooth so that only that, like a little fang, was just hanging out my mouth. You know what I mean? It was just how that worked. And so they called me. Eventually somebody said, "Let's see it." Thankfully, way too late in life, we got braces, and we fixed that problem. I often say, I don't know if I should say this, but I often say that in my family, we had to wait for somebody to die before we could afford braces. So thanks, Grandma. It was great. So I came later in life, but they came eventually. I got some hardware, so no, I can't recreate that for you. I'm sorry, but that would be fun. The third nickname that came to mind came to me right after I graduated college. In the first year of my first job, a coworker of mine who was a little bit older had a son who was about 8 years old, and he called me old school. And I was the youngest guy in the office, but he called me old school. And the reason he called me old school is because I was still driving the car that I had graduated college with, which was a very aged-looking Chevrolet Malibu, And so he called me old school. The fun part about this is that was 12 years ago, and I'm still driving the same car, So if you want a nickname for me, there it is for you. The last one, this is the most recent one. I got this about a year ago when we moved into our new neighborhood in Wyoming. This one's Nate. That's simply because my neighbor calls me Nate. And I don't know why. And we've corrected her, and we've sent her Christmas cards and all kinds of things, and she still calls me Nate. But you know what? She makes a real mean banana bread. So, Kathy, you can call me whatever you want. You know what I mean? Nate, anything. Just keep bringing the baked goods. All right? So, those are some of the nicknames that I've had over the years. You can call me Nate, too, if you guys want to pick that one up. I don't know. Anyway, some of the nicknames I've had over the years. But I'll tell you this, too. Our church, and you know this, also has a nickname, right? And we just kind of gave ourselves a nickname a few years ago. Our church's nickname is the Co, right? Many of you know it as that, the Co. It's short for the community, because community is such a big part of who we are and what we hope our identity is. But our church has a nickname. The other thing our church has is also the same thing that you have, and it's something that's honestly way deeper than a nickname and even way more important than a nickname. In addition to a nickname, we have a reputation. Right? Now, here's the thing about nicknames and reputations, okay? Here's the thing about that, and this is true of churches, this is true of every business, this is true of every organization, and this is true of every person. It's true about you. But nicknames are chosen, right? They're chosen by other people for you. Often you can kind of choose them for yourselves, or you can at least kind of guide them and lean into it, or lean out of it, or say, I really don't want to be called that, or yeah, that's cool, I like that, right? Nicknames, in one way or another, are chosen. But reputations aren't chosen, reputations are earned. And we all earn a reputation for ourselves, and every organization and every movement and every church earns a reputation for itself as well. And I just think that it's healthy every now and then for every person, for every individual, and for every church to take some time to pause and just take a fresh look at its reputation and what it hopes that its reputation will become in the future. And that's exactly what we're doing as a church in this series, For the Love. Now, For this, honestly, I'll tell you, this is really, it's a series, but it's also more than a series. And my hope is that this actually becomes a movement for us as a church. And every movement comes with action, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. But before we jump in, real quick, if you're new here to the Co, I wanted to share with you really kind of the two goals that I have for us every single Sunday in a space like this. I walk in every Sunday, particularly with the teaching portion of our time together, with two specific goals in mind for us. The first thing is this, and if you're new here, this might resonate with you. My hope is to inspire you, inspire people to follow Jesus. I genuinely believe that following Jesus is the best decision that you could possibly make. It shifts everything about your life. It shifts everything about your experiences. And so many people in this room would tell you that following Jesus was the biggest shift and transformer that they experienced in their life. And so one of my goals is to inspire people to follow Jesus. But I have a second goal, and quite honestly, the second goal today is kind of the main goal today. And so if you're new with us, you're going to get kind of an inside look on what it looks like to follow Jesus, because the second goal is this, to invite Jesus followers to live like Jesus. Now, I'll be honest with you real quick. The second goal is actually oftentimes the harder goal. It seems like it would happen naturally, but quite honestly, it's the harder one to move people towards and through, because as you know, if you've been following Jesus for any amount of time, at some point we become a little bit comfortable. At some point we become a little bit satisfied, and at some point we become a little bit complacent. And yet, I think for all of us, one of the best things that we can do is continually take steps to live more and more like Jesus, which is why that's the second goal and kind of the main goal for today. Now, last week we talked about this. Jesus had a reputation. And Jesus' reputation in the world was largely formed by the way that he interacted with the world and the things that he gave to the world, the thing that he showed to the world, which was at the core, love. We talked about this last Sunday. You can go back and look at this. But the first and primary thing that Jesus did for the world was to love. And that, in many ways, became the basis for the church, especially the earliest of churches. Hopefully, the basis for all churches in all points in time. Now, here's what I want to do before we dive in too deep this morning. I want to take a minute, and I want to ask you to just kind of imagine something with me. Is that okay? Just kind of like pause. If you want to close your eyes, you can. Probably won't, but just kind of imagine something with me for a minute. I want you to imagine a world about 1800 years ago. 1900 years ago. A world where Christians gathered on Sunday mornings, but they didn't gather like this in big rooms like this. In fact, Jesus followers 1900-ish years ago would gather in groups of no more than about 30 to 50 people. They'd gather in homes privately or in caves or in tunnels, and it's not that they were trying to keep others from joining their faith and their movement. It's just that they knew that the Roman Empire was very much against their movement, and there was danger to being found out as a group of people. Torture, persecution that they would experience. And so they would gather in small communities and homes and caves, in tunnels throughout the Roman Empire, and new members of the community would know that they were at the right place when they walked up to a house and found this symbol etched in a very small portion of the door. It's a little symbol to let them know that they had found a church gathering on Sunday morning. They would come together and they would do the best they could to make sense of what following Jesus looked like in their world. And this is only about 50, 60, 70 years after the life of Jesus. They weren't even sure exactly what that looked like, but they were just figuring it out. They would come inside these homes, they would gather together, they would talk about things, they would have some teaching. They wouldn't open their Bibles. They didn't have Bibles. At this point in time, the Bible as we know it had yet to be compiled. They would come, they would sing, they would teach, they would listen, they would talk. They were doing their best to figure it out. Now, in this time period, they weren't even known as Christians. They were known as followers of the way. Why? Because for them, Jesus had ushered in an entirely new way of living that the world, the empire, and beyond had never experienced before. Now, today we talk about Christianity often like it's a set of beliefs. In fact, if somebody asks you, hey, are you a Christian? Usually what they mean is, hey, do you believe a certain set of things? But for the first followers, this wasn't about a set of beliefs. This was about ordering their life around the person and the way and the example of Jesus in every single area of their life. Now, there was a challenge for this. Part of the challenge was that the vast majority had never actually met Jesus. And so everything that they knew about Jesus came simply from what they had heard about Jesus from those who had spent time with Jesus. Now, on one particular Sunday at one of these particular houses in this movement, people started to gather a little bit early that week. They started to come in a little bit more expectant and a little bit more excited than normal. And once they got through, they realized that more people were gathering that week than normal. There was a buzz in the air. There was excitement. There was anticipation for something. Because word had gotten out ahead of time that a letter had come. And not just any letter. It was a letter from someone who had actually personally spent time with Jesus. Someone who had heard directly from Jesus, who had been taught directly by Jesus, someone who had watched every moment of Jesus' life and his death and his life again after resurrection. A letter from one of Jesus' first followers, one of his disciples, a man by the name of John. And they gathered together in this house ready to hear from John directly what he would say to them in this letter. And the person in charge began to open the letter and read these words to them. They started at the beginning. They started like this. It said, "We proclaim to you the one who existed from the beginning, whom we have heard and seen." Now, this is a really big deal because no one in that room had heard or seen. But John had heard and seen. John said, we saw him with our own eyes and touched him with our own hands. He is the Word, the essence of life. Then John expounded on that for a moment, and then he closed up his introduction with these words. He says, "We are writing these things so that you may fully share our joy, or so that you might experience the same kind of new life that we've experienced by personally interacting with our Savior, with our leader." Now, in this day and age, letters took a while to get there. And so if someone was going to take the time to write a letter, they were going to take the time to write a lot because they didn't know when the next time they would be able to get a letter to another group of people would be. So John naturally wrote a lot. He went on to tell them about how God is light, how God is like light, and explained to them kind of the essence and the being of God in that way. He went on to write something very practical and specific to them in that time and place. He talked about a group of people who had stopped attending the churches because they had stopped following Jesus in a certain way and disagreed with who Jesus was. And he wrote to them about how they ought to deal or interact with and handle those people. And then about halfway through the letter, John took some time to remind them of what was at the core of their movement, what ought to be at the core of their meetings every Sunday, and what ought to be at the core of their lives every day of the week, the foundation of their faith, what was at the center, what will be at the center, what still is at the center of their faith. He said, this is the message that you have heard from the beginning. In other words, this hasn't changed at all. We should love one another. Now, this is tricky because we have so many definitions of love, right? Like, I love ice cream and I love my wife, you know? I love the Cubs and I love my kid. We have so many different definitions and ways of thinking about and talking about love. And so John reminds them that, hey, you know what real love is. He says, we know what real love is because Jesus gave up his life for us. In the most literal of ways, he sacrificed himself for us in the most real displays of love. He says, so we also ought to give up our lives for our brothers and sisters. And then he does something that kind of gets a little bit uncomfortable, quite honestly. He actually takes another step to make sure that they understand what he really means by this. And so he gets really practical with them, almost too practical. Practical in a way that if you are just really reading it and not just skimming over it, but practical in a way that if you really read it for yourself, ought to make me uncomfortable as well. He says this, listen, if someone has enough money to live well and sees a brother and sister in need, but shows no compassion, or in other words, we might say it like this, if someone sees someone in need and says, well, they should probably just get a job, or if someone sees someone on the side of the road and just dismissively says, well, they should probably stop drinking, or looks at somebody who's hungry and just immediately says, well, they've got options. In other words, if someone looks at a brother or sister in need and doesn't feel anything toward them, John has a question for them. It's really a question, but not really a question. It's more of a statement disguised as a question. He says, how can God's love be in that person? Because God's love doesn't come with should-haves. They should have done this. They should have done that. They should have gone there. God's love comes with I cans and I get tos. And then after he asks this question that's not really a question, right? He talks about something that every generation of the church needed to hear. He said, dear children, let's not merely say that we love each other. Let us show the truth by our actions. And then he goes on to say something that kind of reminds them of something and puts it all kind of in perspective. He says, our actions will show that we belong to the truth, so we will be confident when we stand before God. It's a reminder to them, a reminder to many of us that one day they were going to stand before their Heavenly Father. And in that moment, they were going to question whether or not they could be confident or should be confident. They're going to start to wonder about their life and if they did enough or lived it in the right ways or operated in the way that their Father had designed them to operate. And in that moment, they weren't going to stop and think about their intentions, things they hoped to do. In that moment, they were going to reflect back on their actions, the things they chose to do. And John's saying, hey, if you're truly following Jesus, and if you've truly been filled with the love that he showed to you, and if you've truly let that love spill out in the world towards others, you have no reason to not be massively confident one day when you stand before your Heavenly Father. Why? Because real love always leads us to action. Love isn't something we say, it's something that we show. And the first Christians, we talked about this last week, the first Christians lived like that was true. In fact, that was the very thing that they were known for. The way that they interacted and engaged with needs in their community, the way they showed up for the hurting and the distraught, the way they showed up for the people who needed love the most. That's how they built their reputation. In fact, so much so that over the course of just a couple of hundred years, they went from being this massively persecuted small movement to being a large movement that was platformed by the same Roman Empire that had persecuted it. All because they were known for their love. Now, let me ask you this. At some point, our movement is going to change hands. Like at some point, people are going to be talking one day about our day and how we operated and how we acted and how we lived. At some point, they're going to talk about what we're known for. For some of us, maybe that's in 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, but there's a point where this gathering will still take place, but none of us will be here. And a whole new generation of people will be sitting in seats like these under the name of this church. And my question for us this morning is simply this: when that day comes, and when people look back on us, what will we be known for? Will we be known most for our beliefs? Will we be known most for our positions? Will we be known most for the points that we made in culture? Will we be known most for the people we supported? Will we be known most for the things, the fights, the debates that we won? Or will we be known for our love? So what I want to do this morning and for the rest of this series is I want to invite us to do something that we actually get the chance to do once a year here at the Co. I want to invite us to take and to make one massive expression of love to our world around us. We're going to do it through something that we do every year here at the Co. Something we call it a year-end generosity initiative. Now, as soon as I say that, some of you get nervous. Because if you've been here at the Co before, you know what comes with this. And you know that in just a few minutes, I'm going to actually ask you to do something. And I'm going to actually ask you to give something. And it's the hardest thing for most of us to give. It's not our time. We say that we value our time, but we give our time so freely. I'm willing to bet that at some point this week, every one of us found ourselves in a meeting or on a phone call or in a conversation and wondering, why did I say yes to this? You know? For most of us, the hardest thing for us to open up our hands with and give away is our resources. And yet, when we talk about things like this, I'll be honest with you, I don't get nervous. I get excited. Because I've just found over the years in my life and in the lives of so many people that when it comes to the area of love in our life, and it comes to our hearts, and it comes to our hands, generosity is one of the most spiritually transformational steps that we can take, especially for those of us who are followers of Jesus. And so through the course of this series and through the course of the rest of the year, I want to invite all of us together, collectively and communally, as one church family, to take a step of love for the sake of our world. We're going to do it through an initiative that we're calling For the Love. Couldn't see that coming. But here's my hope for this, and here's why we called it this. My hope this year for us is that we would be wildly generous and wildly open-handed and take wild steps of love, but that our motivation at the core would come from one place and one place only. That our generosity would be motivated by love. Not by guilt, oh, I have to. Not by shame, oh, I need to get something in return or to earn something or deserve something. Not even by habit. Some of us, honestly, were generous by habit. But that our generosity would be motivated by our love, specifically our love for three things. And I'm excited to tell you about these three things. The first one is our love for our neighbors, the people in the world around us, directly around us here in the Forest Lake community. The second, for the love of the church. And I don't just mean this church, but the church at large, both here, near, and far. I'll tell you about that in a second. And the third, for the love of the next generation, the group of people who we're going to hand the reins over to in a few decades. So what I want to do for the rest of our time together is I just want to tell you about some of the ways that we have an opportunity to express love to our world in each of these areas. Is that all right? Okay. All right, let's talk first about the love of our neighbors, okay? I'm excited about this. We get to partner with a few different partners in our community that we've served with at GOMAD many times, and some of these have been financial partners, and one of these is actually going to be a new financial partner this year. The first project that we get to do to show love is this. It's our Family Pathways Christmas meals. Every year over the last, I want to say 7 or 8 years, we've partnered with Family Pathways and said, hey, who are the people in your ecosystem, people in your sphere of influence, who do not have the ability to provide a great Christmas meal for their family? And we just believe that every family in our community ought to have a great meal on the table, honestly, every evening, but especially ought to have a great meal on the table on Christmas evening. And so every year they give us a list. This year they gave us a list of 150 families that otherwise will not have the ability to provide a Christmas meal for themselves. And we said, hey, we'll take it. Give us the whole list. That's the first thing we get to do. The second group we get to partner with is a newer partner for us. It's Rangers Supporting Rangers. Many of you partner with Rangers Supporting Rangers. A few weeks ago, we did a food drive for them during GOMAD. We want to now turn around and not just do a one-time food drive, but we actually want to provide financial partnership for them as well, for them to invest in, no strings attached, whatever they need most in this season. Rangers Supporting Rangers, if you're not familiar, they do a number of things to partner with the school district to serve underprivileged families within our schools. One of the things they do that I just love is they provide food for kids who are food insecure on the weekends. So there are kids in our community whose primary source of food is school lunches and school breakfast during the week. And so then Friday comes, they leave school, and then Saturday comes, and they don't go to school. And Rangers Supporting Rangers stuffs their backpacks with food before they leave on Friday to help carry them and bridge the gap between Friday and Monday. And we get to come alongside and partner with them. The third group is this. It's the 156 Club. The 156 Club is a newer partner. We just started serving with them at our earlier GOMAD this year. So we've served with them for 2 GOMADs now, partnering with them. The 156 Club serves a phenomenal role in the Forest Lake community. This is a house that houses meetings, specifically for people who are struggling with addiction. So a lot of Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, Narcotics Anonymous meetings, etc., take place in this home. It's a space for them to have a comfortable place to come, to privately engage, and to walk through and talk through the things that they're working through and experience help. Many people in our church have actually experienced the benefit of being a part of the 156 Club, and we've served them by showing up and repairing things. Now we want to show up with resources and say, hey, what do you most need now? We're here for it, and we want to invest in it. It's a phenomenal organization. I'm just excited that we get to take this next step with them. Now, let's talk real quick about the love that we get to show for the church. So we want to love our neighbors. We also want to love the church, both here, near, and far. Let's talk specifically about here. One of the things that we get to do every year through this generosity initiative is show love to our church by strengthening the ministry fund. Now, you know this probably, or we've talked about it before, just like about every other nonprofit, we go the year and we actually spend more than we make through the balance of the year, knowing that at the end of the year, the bulk or a significant portion of contributions will come in. That's how most nonprofits operate. That's how we operate as well. A significant number of our donations come in near the end of the year. And how we finish one year is how we start the next year. And so it's really important for us that we finish the year from a position of strength to start the next year at a position of strength because of all that's happening here. When we talk about this, what we're talking about is not light bulbs and crayons. What we're talking about is creating spaces for people to come and experience the life-changing power of Jesus and engage with their questions of faith and discover what being curious about Jesus looks like and how he might actually transform their life. Many of you in this room have seen your life change drastically because of your involvement in the local church. And so when we give to the local church, we're actually paving the way for people who most of us have never even met before to come and experience the same kind of transformation in their lives as well. Now, I'll tell you that it used to be the case that at the end of the year, this is all we did. Right? This was our focus. We would talk about this the last few weeks of the year. We would say, hey, we want to strengthen our ministry fund as a church, and that's it. And we made the decision a year ago that at the end of the year, hey, we're going to do that, and that's important. But we're also going to build on top of that because we don't want to be just generous towards God's church here. We want to be generous to what God's doing in the world around us. And this year we get to take a few steps, particularly with the way that God is building the church in the world around us. So we want to invest in the church here, but also invest in the church near through something that we haven't had the chance to do as a church for a while, which is partner with Converge, which is a network that we're a part of that specifically does a number of things, but one of the things they do is church planting, which is just like church speak for starting a new church. Okay. Now, here's why this matters. Let me tell you this real quick. Church planting is statistically one of the most effective ways to reach new people who have yet to experience Jesus. And church planting is actually how we started. I often say every church was a church plant. I don't care how old it is. Every church was a church plant at one point. And 25 years ago, we were a church plant. And actually, in the first 5 years of our church, many of you may not even know this, in the first 5 years of our church, we actually partnered to launch 3 new churches. One of them was in North Branch, one of them was closer to the cities, and one of them was in Ukraine. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. Okay. But then about 20 years ago, that was the first 5 years ago, or first 5 years of our church. And for the last 20 years, we actually haven't been as intentional in investing in church planting. And I just thought, I don't know when the right time is to start re-engaging that, but this time seemed good. And I just feel like we ought to be a part of what God's doing, not just specifically here, but what he's doing in our region, and partner with other churches that are getting started and help them get off the ground in the same way that others helped us get off the ground 25 years ago. And so we're a part of a network of churches called Converge. It's a phenomenal network of churches, and one of the things that they do really well is plant churches. In fact, they have a 92% success rate at planting churches, which in church world is like astronomically good. So this year, we want to actually make this a part of our church's DNA again and get back into church planting as well. The second way we want to show love to the church. So it's here, near, let's talk about far. Talk specifically about Big Family Church, which is the church that we planted in Ukraine 20 years ago. Now, things in Ukraine have changed a little bit over the last 20 years, particularly over the last 3 to 5 years. And many of you know, right, because of the war with Russia, things in Ukraine look very, very differently than when we started partnering with them. And in fact, Pastor Sergey, he and I stay in touch. Pastor Sergey, when he shares what they do, it's so massively different that they still are a church, but they're also like, they're church 1 day a week, and 6 days a week, they're like this humanitarian social good organization, just meeting all kinds of needs in their community, feeding the hungry, providing shelter for people who need it, going above and beyond to just love their community incredibly well. And it's like a full service 7 day a week operation at this point. Now, last year, we did something phenomenal through our year-end initiative. Last year, you guys actually provided, if you remember, for Sergey, Pastor Sergey, to get generators, like battery storage devices. I don't even know the right word for that, right? But like generators for their church, because the power grid in Ukraine is becoming more and more unstable. And so what they were able to do is store power off of the power grid when the power grid was on, so that when the power grid turned off or became unstable, they could tap into those generator stores and continue to operate. So I was talking with Pastor Sergey just a few weeks ago. I said, hey man, like, what can we do to love you guys well in this season? He said, well, the Ukrainian government has told us that as winter is coming, they expect the power grid to become less and less and less and less reliable, which means that we're going to have the ability to refuel our generators less and less and less and less. He said, but if we had the funds to do it, we could put solar panels on our roof. And the solar panels will fuel the generators every time that the sun's out. And we'll be completely independent from the power grid and able to serve our community and keep our doors open and our lights on no matter what happens. And I thought, man, what better way for us to step up and continue partnering with the church that we planted 20 years ago, that looks nothing like the church that we planted 20 years ago, but looks more like the church today than it ever has before, than to do that. So I'll just tell you, I'll just be transparent with you. I already told Sergey that we're going to do that. So, I mean, like, if you guys don't give, I might have to sell a kidney. But I already told him that we're going to do that. But you hear these things and you see these things, and I look at that and I go, there's no way that we can't do that. We're going to show up for the church here, near, and far. Last area we want to show love is this. We want to show love to the next generation of our church, the people that we will pass the church on to one day. And the first thing we want to do to show love toward them is this. It's through an upgraded youth space. Now this is kind of fun for me. Some of you may be familiar with where our student ministry meets on Wednesday nights, and some of you aren't as familiar with where they meet on Wednesday nights. So I will tell you. On Wednesday nights, our student ministry, and it's like growing phenomenally. It's going incredibly well somehow, despite the space that they're in. They meet every week, and it's a great space, but it's the Forest Lake Senior Community Center. And I don't mean like senior high community center. It's the Forest Lake Senior Community Center. And so every week our junior high and our senior high students are meeting in a space that was designed and decorated and developed for seniors. And it's good bones, but it feels like a senior community center. But there are some things that we can do, if we have the resources to do it, to upgrade that experience, to provide furniture for them, to provide some things that we could actually put on the walls that look different. I'm not going to say better, but look different than quilts, you know? Some things that we can do to significantly upgrade that space so that when they walk in and when they invite their friends in, what they feel is a space that was created for them, that's welcoming to them and hospitable for them, and says, you really are in the right place, and you really do belong here. And I can't think of a better group of people in our church for us to invest in than that. The second thing that we want to do with this, last thing we want to do, is our Mega Sports Camps scholarships. Many of you are familiar with Mega Sports Camp. Mega Sports Camp is one of the best things that we do all year long, especially in the summer. Mega Sports Camp is an opportunity for kids, both in our church and kids in our community, to come and learn two things. They learn about sport. You didn't see that coming. They learn about Jesus. You also didn't see that coming, right? But it's an opportunity for them to do that. Here's what Mega Sports Camp has become. It's actually, and we thought it might be this, but we had no idea to what degree it would be this. It's become one of the best outreach opportunities that we get with families in our community. We have heard so many stories over the last 2 years of families that walked into our church for the first time on a random Tuesday night to drop their kids off at Mega Sports Camp and walked out of our doors on Thursday night at the end of Mega Sports Camp and said, we'll see you on Sunday morning. Families that walked in and literally had zero experience with church. Kids who said, hey, you guys keep talking about the Bible. What's that? And they went home with one. And then they brought it back that Sunday when their parents came back with them. We found that 50% of the families that walk into Mega Sports Camp for the first time walk into our auditorium for the first time on a Sunday morning. It's one of the best things that we do. And every year we offer scholarships to kids who are not a part of our church, and scholarships to families who are not a part of our church, that they might experience our church, and really they might experience you. Last year, we raised money for that scholarship fund during this year-end initiative. Then Mega Sports Camp came around, and we spent twice as much as we had raised for that scholarship fund. So this year, we want to double the scholarship fund. And now, we didn't say no to any family. That's where we're always going to figure it out. You know what I mean? But this year, we want to double the scholarship fund to keep up with the growth that we're experiencing with Mega Sports Camp. Now, that's all of the ways. I know that's a lot of ways, and some of you are like, how many more? Okay, that's all of the ways that we want to show love to the world around us as we come to the end of the year. And some of you are probably sitting there and thinking, man, that's a lot. Some of you have priced out solar panels, and you know they ain't free. Some of you have renovated spaces in your house, and you know that remodeling or redeveloping a youth space, that doesn't happen with dimes. And some of you are wondering, hey, is all of this possible? And honestly, I do think it's possible if we're intentional in the way that we process and the way that we show love to our world. So let me talk to you real quick about our goals for this initiative. Let me talk to you about the goals for the love. All right, we have two goals for this, okay? I'm going to talk about the second goal first, because the second goal is actually the one that you're wondering the most about, okay? The second goal is the financial goal. I'll tell you about that. And I'll be honest with you, I really spent some time processing and talking through this. I remember a conversation I had with a board where they're like, hey, this feels good, you know? I'll tell you, for me, it felt like a stretch, but I think it's possible. So let me tell you this real quick. Let's all take a deep breath together maybe first. Can we do that? This is just for me. No, I'm kidding. Our financial goal for this, to do all of this, to show love in all of these ways that we desire to, it'll take $100,000 to do it. Now, just to make sure we're on the same page, this is $100,000 beyond our typical monthly giving. And so many of you are like Emily and I. You give every single month on a consistent basis. The moment it comes in, you have a portion designated that goes out. Right? This is $100,000 in addition to our typical yearly or typical monthly, giving. Right? So do that every single year. It's a stretch, but I think we can do it. I really do. But I'll tell you this. This isn't the most important goal to me. In fact, if we fall short on this goal, I'm okay falling short on this goal. I'm just not okay falling short on the second goal, which is really the first goal. The first goal, the primary goal, the goal I care most about is what we call a family goal. Our family goal is this, that 100% of people who call this church their home, and if you're here this day for the first, second time, whatever, this doesn't apply to you, but if you've called this church your home, that 100% of us would participate in generosity between now and the end of the year. A generosity that is motivated by love. Again, not because we feel like we have to, not because we feel like we want to feel like we did something, not because we feel like it's an expectation, but a love that flows from us, a love that was flowed to us by our Heavenly Father, and that we can't help but give to the world around us. And for us, participation is going to look like a number of things. For some of us, participation looks like 5 digits. For some of us, participation looks like 1 digit. It's not about the amount. It's about the motivation and the heart from which our generosity flows. And my hope is that every one of us would take a step of love. Now, I'm willing to bet that you have questions about this, and that's okay. And if you have questions, I'll just tell you the majority of your questions will be answered online at a website, theco.church/forthelove. But you can also talk to me. You can ask me questions in the lobby. You can email me, call me, whatever you want to do. But before you get lost in the details and start jumping online, put your phone away if you already started pulling it out, before you start jumping on the website and getting into all your questions, I want to give you one step this week. Can I do that? It's one step I want you to take this week. And the step I want you to take this week is not to give. I don't want you to give anything this week. In fact, you can't give anything this week. We're not even opening this up for giving until the end of next Sunday. So I told my wife this week, I was like, if someone brought me a check for $100,000 today, I would say, keep it and wait and go and take this step first. And she said, nobody's going to believe you if you tell them that. So if anybody wants to test me, we'll find out. No, seriously though. I want to give you one step this week. It's not to give. Your step this week, my step this week, is to pray. And I don't want you to pray for an amount, okay? In fact, I'm going to ask you to not pray for an amount. So it's like some of you are already thinking, your wheels are already turning. What did we do last year? What might we be able to do? Shut all of that noise off. I want you to get numbers out of your head. I want you to pray for an amount. I want you to pray. I want to pray for love. I want you to pray and say, God, would you actually grow my heart for the things that you care about in our world? Would you actually help me to see needs around me with more compassion than I have? Would you help me to care more about your people and your priorities? Would you help me to grow in love? And so to help you do that, I want to give you a tool this week. You're going to get one of these cards on the way out the door. It only has one thing on it, okay? That's something that many of us haven't done in a while, if ever. Some of us grew up with these. Some of us haven't done it in a really long time. It's a memory verse. Anybody remember a memory verse from childhood? We used to get these and get like Bible bucks when I was a kid. I think they might still do it. Some of your kids are doing that right now. I have a memory verse for you. Something for us to take the time to reflect on this week and just let it soak into you and become a part of you. Okay? It's a verse that we actually studied last week that says this. It says, no one has ever seen God, but if we love each other, God lives in us, and his love is brought to full expression in us. Now, since we're going to memorize this together, why don't we just read this together real quick? Can we do that? Okay, let's read this together real quick. It's your first practice. It's your first memorization session. You ready? Okay, let's say this together. No one has ever, but if we to full expression. Pretty good. Good job. Some of you even said where it's from. Some of you can't read that font. All right, just for practice, let's do this again, but just for fun, okay? Last thing we're going to do today, let's do this again, but let's take some of the words out. You ready? No one has ever, but if we, each other, God lives, and his is brought to. See? You're already halfway there. You got this figured out. Just one more half to go. Hey, listen, seriously. I mean this. I love you guys. I'm proud of you guys. It is an incredible honor and joy to be on mission with you and with this group of people and with this community of Jesus followers. And I cannot wait to see what he does in our world through us. Let me pray for us real quick before we go. Jesus, I thank you for today. I thank you for the ways that you have shown us love in the most real of ways. God, will we be the kind of people who never lose sight of that and keep our hearts centered on that fact? God, will we be the kind of people who live like our reputation matters, who live like what we're known for matters, and who live like we are the very body of you in our world because we are? God, as we go about the week ahead from us, God, would you help us all to take time, to pause, to reflect, to listen, to pray? And God, would you give us one thing this week? Would you give us more love for your world? Would you help us to go to work or to school, to wherever we go tomorrow and see people differently? Would you help us to end the week with a heart that's bigger and different than the one we started with? And God, would you use us to be your display of love to the world in a way that our world can't help but notice, in a way that through our love they truly do see you. Jesus, we love you. We thank you for the chance that we get to be you to our world. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.